Hey everybody, welcome back to the Contrarians. We got another Dark Horse album edition for you tonight, and that's where our Patreon members have picked a topic. In this case, actually, Martin picked a couple of albums that the Patreon members voted on, and the winner for tonight was The Who, It's Hard. And usually with our Dark Horse albums, what we do is we go around and each one of our experts will give a yay or nay vote, and then they'll rate the album out of 10. And then at the end, we'll have a consensus rating for everybody. So usually Dark Horse albums are albums that are not usually seen as the best album, maybe the worst, maybe not the worst, maybe middle of the road. And we kind of have a discussion on whether it is a good album, an underrated gem, or it is a bad album and deserves to be at the bottom of the list. So we're going to go around to everybody. First thing I want to do is say, hey, how's everybody doing?
Yeah, good.
Great.
Thanks. Going well.
Great, Marco. Glad to be here.
Yeah.
Awesome. And if anybody else wants to join these chats, you can join us over at Patreon. At any tier, we'll get you into these chats. We also have a Ko-Fi or a Ko-Fi, I don't know how to pronounce it, but there you can support the channel without subscribing on a monthly basis. And we have t-shirts, link is in the description. So what we're gonna do is, the first thing I'm gonna do actually is I'm gonna go over a little bit of research about It's Hard. It's Hard came out in 1982. It was certified gold and charted at number 8 in the US charts, according to my research. Far Out magazine rated or ranked the Who albums and put It's Hard at number 10. And they said this album contains some wonderful songs like Athena, which peaked at number 28 in the Billboard pop charts. It also features songs like Dangerous, It's Your Turn, Eminence Front, and One at a Time, which highlighted the group's talent. The song I've Known No War is also noteworthy as it featured the orchestral arrangement from the Quadrophenia film version, I've Had Enough. There were certainly moments on this record that saw it become a beloved moment from their canon, but was largely middled by critics of the day. Number 1 was Who's Next on that list. Louder Sound did a ranking of the albums. It's Hard came in at number 16, so I think they might have added some a live album or something here and there, because I don't know if they had 16 studio albums, but they said, while lead single Athena is insipid, with Pete Townsend at his most inconsequentially self-regarding, the guitar solo-led, groove-driven highlight Eminence Front remains in their live set to this day. Elsewhere, the stylish muscle of Roger Daltrey powerhouse I've Known No War and epic dynamics of John Entwistle's dangerous work in the album's favor, but Kenny Jones continues to willfully behave himself. It's Hard, their last studio set prior to a 24-year hiatus, is further hobbled by the always debilitating 80s factor. Its contemporary Glyn Johns production, Sheen lacks teeth, and its Tommy referencing cover documents a midlife style crisis that's probably best forgotten. That was a mouthful of words, that review. Number 1 on their list was Quadrophenia. And Best Ever Albums had It's Hard at number 12, and their number 1 was Who's Next. So that was just a few little things that I pulled up. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go around to our experts, tell us what you thought about the album, why you liked it, why you didn't like it, rank it out of 10, and let's start with Bicycle Legs.
Thank you, Marco. Well, this is my copy of It's Hard. It's an original UK pressing. As far as the yay or nay, I'm going to go with a yay, but in as much as I don't think there is such a thing as a bad Who album. I think they're all worthwhile to a lesser or greater extent. This one probably to a lesser extent. Although I will say, in my humble opinion, it's a better album overall than Face Dancers, and probably I think a better album overall than Who Are You? But what I think it lacks is it lacks that sort of really sort of punch through track that both of those albums have. Like Who Are You has the title track, Who Are You, which they still play on the radio to this day. Face Dancers has You Better You Bet, which I still think is a wonderful single. I think this album lacks that sort of really punch through track like that, but I think overall, sort of top to bottom, it's a more consistent album. I think, unlike I'm going to disagree with one of those reviews. I think on this album, Kenny Jones is actually trying to sound a little bit more like Keith Moon than he was on Face Dancers. And I think he does that with, like, if you listen to Athena, there's some fills in there that sound very Moonish, I think. Cooks County is a song I really like. Eminence Front's definitely one of the highlights, as is I've Known No War. I've Known No War is probably the best song on the album for mine. I like the sound of the production. I think it's good. It's modernized, but it doesn't sound sort of pandering to an early 80s sound. It nods to it without overly pandering to it. That's my thought anyway. So overall, I would probably give this album a 7 out of 10. I think it's a good Who album. It's a worthwhile album, but I wouldn't put it towards the top of the list for Who albums.
Cool.
Nice. We got a 7 on the scoreboard so far. All right. Why don't I throw it over to Martin next? Why don't you take it away, Martin?
All right. So here's my copy of it. It's a Canadian vinyl copy, and I better keep that out to look at the songs. Here's an Athena single. So as Marco mentioned, this is essentially an update on Tommy with Pinball Wizard. Now he's playing a video game, right? Space Invaders or something like that. Here's a tour program of the 1982 situation. There's a shot of the band there, looking all nice and groomed. So basically, my feeling on this album is I've always had a soft spot for this version of The Who, and we have a Contrarians episode where I call Face Dances my favorite Who album, believe it or not. So I definitely like Face Dances more than this record. I like what Bicyclelegs said about the production on this, because it is definitely avoiding any 80s tropes. So it's got just good, solid, salt of the earth 70s production, but I don't think they do a very good job of it. That's the thing. It was recorded in Glyn John's home studio. I think the worst part of it is the snare drum sound and the tom-tom sound. So not very good. And Kenny Jones definitely does try to do some Keith Moon things. Not like that's a good thing, not like that's necessary really, but he is fairly spirited with what he does, but I cringe every time he hits those toms because they sound like cardboard boxes on here. It's quite a poppy album. To me, this is what I like about this era of The Who is it's Pete in that very introspective mode where he's doing this album, he's doing Face Dances, he's doing Empty Glass, he's doing All the Best Cowboys Have Chinese Eyes, which is one of my favorite albums of all time. Eventually White City. So he's kind of he gets a lot of stick for some of the lyrics on here, but I think the lyrics are kind of a highlight of the thing. It keeps it interesting when everything else is a little poppy and a little anemic and a little vanilla. I don't think particularly the grooves of Kenny are that great. I don't like the keyboard sounds very much. Diving into the thing, I love Athena. I love the first single. I think that's a great song, just kind of an odd construct. My favorite song on it is It's Up for Grabs. It's either It's Hard with the dependable Louie Louie chords, and that's one where you actually hear a little bit of Pete singing. Pete only sings one song on this album in terms of a lead vocal on here, and that's Eminence Front, and does a really great job of it. Eminence Front. I'm right about that, right? Pete sings one?
Yes.
John sings one. Yeah, Pete sings one. And Pete is a little bit in there in the background vocals and kind of called co-lead vocals a little bit here. They're not really, but he sings Eminence Front, and Eminence Front is an absolute drop-dead classic. It's so different for The Who, and yet it's so successful, and it deserves to be in the set. And that music has been used as TV theme music, and you hear it all the time, right? Super important song. But It's Hard is great. I just love that whole kind of Baroque little keyboard line in there, little prog rocking, and I just love that title too. It's kind of a weird title to name an album. It's Hard, it's funny. And then I noticed driving around today listening to this, I had loaded up the with the bonus tracks, and they're live tracks from this album, which is nice and appropriate. They did that right. But when they did It's Hard, Pete said something like, it's not that hard, actually. Actually, the hard part is making it sound hard. So that's kind of cool. But yeah, love those two. I love I've Known No War. That's the most hard hitting song on here. I think is the most powerful from a production point of view. Oddly, I did notice that when they stick when they stick a bunch of echo and reverb on the snare, there are some drum treatments on here that are a little better than others. The first 4 or 5 songs, I guess so, of the album have kind of worse drum sounds than in general the back end of the album. Why Did I Fall for That's kind of a nice poppy Who thing with a bit of a Kinks vibe. I like Cry If You Want with that military marching thing. There's a bit of Keith to that as well. So I think the problem with this album, like I say, I have a real soft spot for this poppy period of the Who. This is kind of when I first discovered the Who because they weren't heavy enough. So yeah, I came kind of late to them. It was probably Face Dances as a new release, really, where I started, properly paying attention. But I think the good songs on here, about 4 or 5 of them are really good, and some of my favorites, and lean that way because I like this period of the band. But the ones I don't like, I definitely don't like very much. I've never really been a big fan of John Entwistle's writing, and I definitely don't want to hear him sing either. So I'm not crazy about that. So overall, I would give this album, I'm going to go 6.5. Actually, one more thing I wanted to say. This does come in very often as the worst Who album. People really have a hatred on for Endless Wire, and I love Endless Wire to death. And other than that, people like the new one, Who, but nothing really from the 70s gets super high up there for worst Who album. Otherwise, you go back to the 60s and pick something out. But I think generally it's hard. If you asked thousands of Who fans and took a big poll, I think this would come in last. There you go.
All right, we got a 7 and a 6.5 up on the scoreboards. I'm interested in seeing if Reid or Peter are going to go higher or lower. So why don't we try, let's go with Reid. What do you think, Reid?
All right. Well, get my notes together here. So I became a Who fan only about 10 years ago. So as a result of that, I don't have any particular loyalty to any specific decade of the Who's output. I used to be partial to their pre-Live at Leeds material, and then I became a huge fan of Quadrophenia once I really got into it. I think by the time you get to the 80s, and this is a comment that Martin had put out on your Contrarians episode, the 80s were the decade of Pete Townsend. He had moved beyond the need for the Who at that point, and his best stuff is unquestionably Empty Glass, All the Best Cowboys Have Chinese Eyes, and White City, a Novel. Of those 3, my favorite is White City, a Novel. Combine it with David Bowie's The Buddha of Suburbia for a night of English ennui. But Roger Daltrey, apparently, I know in Pete Townsend's autobiography, he says Roger Daltrey complained that what was left for the Who were just the offcuts that Pete didn't want to use on his solo albums. And that's kind of how I feel about the Who's output in the 80s. So I don't mind the fact that it was recorded without Keith Moon. I know Keith Moon is a huge part of the Who's sound, but let us not forget that even before his passing, Keith Moon was not the drummer that he used to be. And I don't think that he would have put in a good performance on these albums, even if he had still been around. Also, I find his drumming frantic and obtrusive, and it rarely matches the songs. It required Pete to write in a certain way to match that drumming. I think that what Kenny Jones does is exactly what Pete Townsend wants. And again, that's my feeling with It's Hard, the album is what Pete wants from his music. He was very happy in the 80s, which makes it all the stranger to me that the very first single, Athena, on my copy, I don't know if they changed it later. I think I've got an original CD. Athena's the first song, and it opens up with an acoustic number that sounds like an offshoot from Tommy. And I just think, what a strange way to open an album. It really brings the energy down and sets the mood for what I think of. My one-line review is that It's Hard is the Who's politest album. It's got instrumentation like it was put together by the Miami Sound Machine if the Miami Sound Machine was composed entirely of incredibly polite Englishmen?
Yeah.
So, and I know that sounds negative, but it's not. It's just so different than their stuff in the 60s and the 70s. Roger Daltrey is a shouter. He was always a shouter, and he's at his best when he's able to really shout an angry lyric, which is why I think people love I've Known No War. I think his vocal sounds really good on It's Your Turn, the second track. And then it turned out that that was a John Entwistle composition because Pete was writing much softer, more introspective music. And I think the parts where you hear Pete's vocal come into the songs, that is much more the sound that Pete had in his head. And Roger does his best to sing over those, but he's still kind of shouting a little bit. And I don't think his vocal necessarily suits the song all that well. And then we get to the one that Pete actually sings, and it's a stone cold classic for me. I love Pete's noodling around on synthesizers. He was famous for this is in the days when synthesizers took an entire room, and he would just noodle around for hours and hours, and that's how he came up with the intros to a lot of songs that have these synth parts. And I love the synth part that starts off Eminence Front, and then it has a guitar solo, a long single note guitar solo. I don't mean single note as in he only plays one note. I mean, he plays one note at a time in lines, but that is not something that Pete usually did on albums. And I love the fact that that exists because you get to hear Pete as a lead guitarist, and he was so much of a rhythm guitarist. And he has said over and over again, that's because as a lead performer, Entwistle and Moon ate up all the oxygen in the band. So that now Keith is gone, Pete's able to actually stretch out and play. But he only does that really on, pardon me, he only does that really on the one song. I do like this album. I think, I said it's polite, but it's the Who doing what the Who do, or more accurately, it's Pete Townshend doing what Pete Townshend does, backed with the Who. But it's okay. My criticism of it is that it goes down smooth, but it leaves no trace. There aren't any songs other than Eminence Front that I really love, right? But I don't mind any of the songs on it. It's the Who is background music. So I'm giving it 6 out of 10.
Good job. Yes, absolutely. Some nice points there. Love it.
Awesome. Thanks, Reid. All right. Last but not least, Peter.
How can I follow that one? All right. Well, with the Who, this album, I only literally heard this for the first time a couple of weeks ago, and it's good. Fresh set of ears. I love the Who, but I love the classic era. And I guess my first memory of the Who is when I was a young kid seeing Tommy, the movie, and then diving into the Who back catalogue from there. When I played this album, and I played it about 4 or 5, 6 times, what's missing to me is, where are the power chords? I mean, the Who, when you think, if you were looking it up in an encyclopedia and you look up, the description of the Who, it would be air shapes, windmill, power chords. There's no power chords on this album, and that's something I felt like I was power chord deprived. There's maybe one song, It's Your Turn, where it starts to have the classic Who chord structure and, some power chords. But other than that, it's a very downbeat, introspective album. Now, you look at the album cover, Pete doesn't look too happy, does he? He's got this expression in his face, what the hell am I doing here? Martin, is this one of these hypnosis jobbies? I don't know.
No, I don't think it's hypnosis. No.
But it's a very obscure reference to Tommy, radio. It's a very obscure reference to, okay, we had Tommy with the pinball. Let's update to the 80s and let's wear fin ties, look new wave, and put a Space Invaders machine with a kid in the middle. Yeah. So they don't look happy at all. They've got the new wave haircuts. And this album is all about, where do we sit in the pantheon of rock in 1982? So you've got the Stones. They're just ticking along. They're not really upgrading their sound, but they've got that sort of rootsy, and they're just ticking along, and and they're doing big sales. But the Who, this album to me sounds very uncertain. Now I know Pete was going through a lot of issues. He was going through rehab, and I agree with you, Reid. And we've covered this on my rock channel a few times. Sequencing of songs is so important, and if you don't get it right, you lose it. And I think starting off with Infina is quite puzzling. I wouldn't have started with that song. So the song Infina, the background was that he had an unrequited love for the actress Therese Russell. And I think he was on a coke binge, and he wrote this song the next day. And it was basically that he was in love with Therese, and she didn't want a bar to do with it. And so that sort of sets the tone for this album. And Feeder's not a happy song. It's about somebody that can't get the woman that he wants, and he's really yearning for it. And, going through the track list, the album ends with a song called Cry If You Want. And that is a really angry song. It's like a goodbye kiss to the fans. It's got really machine guard, hard chords, and the lyrics are, basically, it's just sort of say, cry if you want, this is what we are. So it doesn't start off happy, it doesn't finish happy, and in between there's a lot of dark lyrical content, a lot of stuff. I agree with what you were saying earlier about, John Entwistle, Martin. I'm getting sick of his songs about his ex-wives and his alimonies and all those sort of different... It's just he's just mining the same thing. But at least in this album, he's still got that little bit of rock dog. You know what I mean? He's still got that sound of the Who. So every time Pete Townshend's bringing his songs into the album and he's getting into that introspective, philosophical, at least John will bring, okay, lads, let's get back to the classic Who sound. And, and it seems like there's a semblance of a windmill song and a few power chords. Look, for me, the strong tracks on this is Eminence Front. And to me, I would visualise this out of, somebody. I think it was played in Miami Vice, so I can imagine that. It's got that sort of new wave sound to it, interesting synth line. I think it's hard. I think of this, the lyric, the lyrics are interesting. I think the vocals of Daltrey, it sounds very Johnny Cash. It's got that sort of country, that sort of low growl, and I thought that was quite interesting. One Life's Enough. That's not that great. What was I looking for? Why I Did Fall for That. That's like a Fleetwood Mac sort of vocal harmonies. To me, it just seems very, it's very polite. It doesn't seem like a typical Who album. Like even Dangerous, it sounds a little bit like Journey. It's a little bit of AOR. It's got the guitar synth stabs. And then I wrote down here that there's one song here that sounds like a bit of a Police song. So I don't know whether they were, sort of trying to compete with, Police were really huge in 1982. So, is this the path that we're going to go down? Are we going to go down that new wave path? So, look, in summary, I think this is an album that they are very unsure where they sort of fit in the world. And to me, by losing their roots and, the garage pop, the power pop and that rock, and it's sort of, to me, it makes it a little bit of an unsatisfying experience. And I agree the Who have never made a bad album, but I couldn't really score it much more than a 6 out of 10.
Cool. I wanted to make one more quick point. There are a lot of lyrics on here. There's not a lot of repetition. You definitely get Pete giving Roger a mouthful of lines. This is almost like the quintessential. If Roger had to sing this whole album every night, he'd be biting bits of his tongue off. There's a lot of words. That is one side worth of words.
Wow.
And there's the other side. And like I say, it's not a lot of repetition. It's just a lot of long, complicated lines. So Pete's very verbose on this album. Just wanted to point that out.
I know Pete gets a lot of stick for writing about his incredibly screwed up life, but I mean, my God, what else are you going to write about if you're Pete Townsend? I mean, they say write what you know, right? So what he knew was infidelity and drug abuse.
Well, it's very entertaining. I think that's the best part of the album. It's almost like an album that's a good read, but not a good listen.
It's very self-confessional for sure.
Yeah. But to be fair, I mean, Pete had been writing introspective lyrics at least since The Who by Numbers, you know. So it's not like this is something new. The other thing I wanted to point out that I forgot to mention when I was having my original go is Roger's vocals on this album. I think on the previous couple of albums, Who Are You and Face Dancers, his vocals had gotten a little bit cartoonish. Like he was almost a parody of Roger Daltrey. And I think he dials that back on this album. I think his vocals sound a little more, a little less cartoonish and a little more like, the song One Life's Enough is a very quiet, you know, ballad. And I think he sings that song beautifully. You know, it reminds me a little bit of, not the song itself, but just the vocal tone. Reminds me a bit of the sort of the quiet parts of a song like Behind Blue Eyes or something like that, when he gets into that really sort of tender vocal. And I like that. I like hearing that from Roger every so often, you know, not just doing the shouty all the time.
Nice.
Yeah, fair enough.
All right, as a group, we're actually pretty on point with each other. Our average calculator score is 6.375. So nobody gave it higher than a 7 and nobody gave it lower than a 6. So we're actually pretty dialed in on this. So why don't we go around to wrap up? Just let us know, I don't know, what your favorite Who album is. And if you want to plug anything, plug it. Or if you just want to say hi to somebody, say hi to somebody. So why don't we start with, this time we'll go backwards. Peter.
Okay. Look, my favorite album's Who Next. I mean, I think that's probably the logical one that everyone sort of picks, but that's the one that I always go back to. And from a live perspective, live at Leeds, that's a killer live album. Yeah, just on my channel, Rock Daydream Nation, we had a really good episode last weekend, which is still up, and it was had a few of the Contrarians on, and building the ultimate 1970s supergroup out of the members of Deep Purple, Black Sabbath, Uriah Heep, Led Zeppelin, Rainbow. So that was a lot of fun, and probably have a part 2 in next month. And going to do a chat with Tim's Vinyl Confessions. We're going to be ranking Def Leppard Hysteria songs in order. So that's one for you, Martin, to watch. But yeah, that's all I've got at the moment.
Cool, thanks, Peter. Reid.
Don't really have anything coming up. I'm floating around on some chats with Peter and the Contrarians. Favorite Who at the moment is definitely Quadrophenia, but I want to say I have a real soft spot for the track Blue, Red, and Gray off of Who by the Numbers. I like Pete Townsend when he's very soft, and he's really a good fingerstyle guitar picker, which he doesn't get a lot of credit for. But Martin, I do not understand your love of Endless Wire. Just going to throw that out there.
That's a long one. Yeah. But well, I'll go next just to say Endless Wire would be very high for me. I'd put Quadrophenia second. I'd put Face Dances first. So there's 3 different eras. But no, I just found that album incredibly daring and strange. And I love the short stuff and the long stuff and the recurring stuff. I just found it almost like a deconstructed, it's almost like a Public Image Limited album to me, that record. I just love how it breaks so many rules. That's why. Otherwise, I've been very, very busy the last few days because my new Dio book, Dream Evil, Dio in the 80s, packing up a lot of those, selling more than those than I thought. But yeah, all those other visual biographies still have those. And everything's at martinpopoff.com. And I have a podcast, History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff. The last one was episode 143 on fade outs, song fade outs. So there you go.
Very cool. Bicycle legs.
Yeah, well, I have my own channel, bicyclelegs. I do a series where it's a little bit similar to this in Dark Horse albums. I call it In Defense Of, where I take an album that's poorly regarded by a band and defend it that it's actually a worthwhile album. And so far I've done Love Beach by Emerson, Lake and Palmer, Under Wraps by Jethro Tull, and last weekend I did Total Devo by Devo. My favorite Who album is Who's Next. I do have a soft spot for the really early Who, though, just like I do with the Stones. I love that sort of beat music period of some of these bands, you know, where they're just coming after the Beatles and that sort of thing. So, yeah, definitely have a soft spot for that. But, yeah, Who's Next? Definitely my favorite Who album.
Nice.
Awesome. And coming to you live from this dark cave, wherever I'm filming from, the Contrarians, give us a like and subscribe. We're almost at 5,000 subscribers, which is absolutely amazing. And we want to thank not only the viewers and Martin and Nick and everybody's helped us a long way, but the Patreon subscribers. I mean, you guys have all been coming out and you've been making these shows incredible. And like, we wouldn't be where we're at without you. So definitely a round of applause for you folks. The three of you here now, but all of our folks back on the page. And some folks subscribe and they don't do any chats. They've just been subscribing for a while and they just support the channel, and that's incredible too. So we appreciate all of that, all of the viewers, all the subscribers. And if you want to join these chats, you can join us over at Patreon. At any tier, we'll get you onto the chats. And then we also have the Ko-Fi thing, and we got t-shirts, TeePublic. The link is in the description. And we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Yeah.
Hey folks, just a little update. We have Pontus here. Pontus was supposed to join our The Who It's Hard discussion. However, with a little bit of a mix-up because of daylight savings time, Pontus actually ended up joining a little bit late, but we were able to grab a hold of him, and he's here now, and he's going to give us his little review about The Who It's Hard. He's going to tell us if he's yay or nay on the album, and he's going to give us a rating out of 10. So why don't you take it away, Pontus? Thanks for joining us.
Oh, yeah. Time lapses and all that. It's great to be here. I'm a huge Who fan. I'm a very huge Who fan. I enjoy them. I first heard them in the 80s, their old stuff, and started collecting them when the box set, 30 Years of Maximum R&B came out. That was a revelation to me, and I read some books about them, and I love the Kids All Right video movie. I think it's a fantastic film. When it comes to It's Hard, I think it's the worst album they ever did. I honestly think it's one of the most. It's tired. It's boring. I've listened to the record half an hour ago, and I can't remember half the songs of it. And that says a lot. I was fortunate to get this box set out of my favorite Who album, Quadrophenia. It was released 10 years ago, 2012, I think. As a 50th anniversary, or was it 2013? I don't know. But it's one of the best albums ever made. And 10 years later, it's down to this. And I think what happened was when the group, when they regrouped after Keith's death, Pete got an offer of doing solo albums and then doing The Who as well, because they weren't really sure whether they would continue. So he signed both contracts and he got an offer he couldn't refuse. So he set himself up to record and write a lot of songs in a very short time. And he says in his book that he wasn't that prolific as a songwriter. And he had a very troubled time at the time during 81 and 82, because he was heavy into drugs. He almost OD'd and was taken into rehab. So when It's Hard Rolls Along, we're recording for that, he is out of rehab and is totally blank. He has some song ideas, but he wants to have the others to be involved and tell him what he's supposed to write. And what comes out of it is very sort of uninspired. It's almost like the Led Zeppelin album, In Through the Outdoor. You hear that the party's over. As for best tracks, I don't know. I mean, It's Hard, the title track, is a decent song. Could end up in a B-side somewhere. But the rest of it, it's just... It's a band going for the motions, and it's no wonder they disbanded after that for a long time. And then they took until 2006. Then they recorded another album under the Who moniker called
Endless Wire.
Endless Wire, yes, and that's okay. And they recorded another Who album in a few years ago, which is also okay. I had the privilege of seeing Who once in 2007, and it was a revelation. It's one of those concerts where I stripped off my T-shirt and just sat there bare-breasted, just singing along. It was just fantastic. It was just fantastic. And they told the story. In '67, they made a lot of concerts in Sweden. They toured with the ABBA, Benny Andersson's band called Hepstars, which is a very huge band in the '60s Sweden. Check out the song Wedding, if you can find it on whatever streaming services you want to. And you can hear, it's pre-ABBA, but they toured with them and they promised not to destroy their equipment, which they said was, they sort of, well, they didn't always keep their promise, but, later on, Townsend has said that Dancing Queen is one of his favorite tracks ever. So I don't know if that is a payback to the destroyed instruments or, whatever. But that story was very fun. And then they, then at the end, they ended with Tea and Theatre, the song. And someone shouted, "Play Substitute." And Pete Townsend looked around him and said, "Fuck off." And that sums up The Who for me, It's still an angry band. It's still, a passionate band. And that is what's missing in It's Hard. It's no passion there.
So just to be clear, you're saying that you like Endless Wire and Who better than you like It's Hard.
Yes, in a sense, but I do think that they are afterthoughts as well. But I do think they are better in a sense that the musicians themselves are feeling better. I don't think the Who album and the Endless Wire album comes off as a turmoil time as from Townsend's point of view. And I think that shows he's more relaxed now and can write stuff. But saying that, I mean, they're very stuck in what they are. They are legacy bands, so the albums are done by a legacy band. And you get, when you get a Who track now, you get a rehash of very often of the Who's Next tracks. Like you have all the bleeps and the blops and from synthesizers and all that. But still, I think they're in better form, in better shape than they were in 1982.
Interesting. I like Who quite a bit, although it has some weak tracks on it. But I think Endless Wire is a different thing entirely. And interesting that you would point out the Turmoil specifically, because that is the album where Pete channeled the problems he was having with the police. I won't go into the scandal. People can look it up. That he then took and put into his mini rock opera on that one. And I find that actually makes it a little uncomfortable to listen to. But I like Who because it's a drama-free album that you can just be happy that, they're still putting out records now and they still sound pretty good.
You can be thankful. Yeah.
Yeah. But Endless Fire, I find a slog, but,
But having said that, it was a while I listened to it. And of course, being to Pete Townsend, he's never free of drama, is he? He's one of those people. They were that kind of band. They always bicker. I mean, one of the things they talk about in the book, he talks in his book, because the book, Who Am I, is very good to read. One of the things he talks about is the fact that Roger Daltrey wanted to kick out Kenny Jones at the time. He couldn't play with him because he said he drummed the wrong way. And Townsend and Entwistle wanted him. So they made a successful tour in 81. But hey, it didn't work out. They finished.
Yeah.
So what would you give?
One out of 10.
Wow. We needed you earlier, Pontus. I'm going to add your score to the calculator. So we got, just to give you the lowdown, Bicyclelegs gave it 7 out of 10. Reid, I think you were next, was 6.5 out of 10. No, Martin, 6.5 out of 10.
Martin was 6.5.
Reid was 6 and Peter was 6, and you're giving it a 1. So that brings our new average to 5.3. Wow.
Right.
You dragged down the average. we were at 6.3.
Sorry,
before,
but I don't like it. I don't like the record. I don't like it.
That's all good. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you two wanted to chat about the Who, or?
No, I'm good. Thank you very much.
What's your favorite Who album, Pontus?
What? Sorry?
I was just going to ask you what your favorite Who album is.
Quadrophenia.
Nice. And what were you going to ask Reid?
I was going to ask him what his favorite album was.
Also, Quadrophenia.
Quadrophenia. That's a masterpiece, I think. I love that album a lot.
Yeah, it's
awesome.
It's just a grandiose sort of rock album with a lot of sound effects and all that. It's theater, really. But it's a beautiful album.
Very cool. All right, thanks. I'm glad that you joined us, Pontus. I'm glad that we got to chat with you.
I'm very happy to join you.
Yeah, I would have felt really bad if I got an email after that said Pontus has joined your meeting. I would have been like, no. So I'm glad we were still on, just wrapping up before you jumped on. So thanks, Pontus. Thank you, Pontus. Thank you, Reid. And I guess we'll catch you next time.
Take care, everyone.